This is a photograph of Wyatt Earp's Northern Saloon in Tonopah, Nevada, taken in 1902. The sign above says, "The Northern, Wyatt Earp, Proprietor," the fame connected to his name being used to help attract customers. The building isn't very wide, but is long, like many businesses in frontier towns. On the front, there is a single window and a door. Inside, I believe we can just make out the outline of a chair. It is one story with a false front, and no hitching posts are shown. There's a boardwalk out front, which would be very welcome if it would rain and cause the streets to turn into mud. There is another building close by on the left, with a ladder attached to the boardwalk, perhaps to help people step up to it. There are no windows evident on the left-hand side of the saloon, not surprising as there is only a small gap between the two buildings. On the right side there is lumber piled up, showing that construction was going on at the time, and there are buildings off into the distance. There are 6 people in the photo, 2 women on horseback, with 4 men behind them. Some people think that the woman on the horse on the left is Josephine Earp, but I haven't found any proof that this is true. This photo represents a brief episode in Wyatt Earp's life. He was 54 years old when he ran the saloon, 2 decades after the gunfight near the OK Corral and his vendetta ride in Arizona. He had just made some money from owning a saloon in Nome, Alaska, which may account for the name he chose for the saloon, the Northern. Coming from the cold of Alaska to the heat of the Nevada desert, Wyatt was not yet done with the frontier. Let's explore the story behind Wyatt Earp and the small saloon in a Nevada mining town. On September 20th, 1898, gold was discovered at Anvil Creek in Alaska, and the following year, gold would be discovered on Nome Beach. A mining camp was soon formed nearby, called Anvil City, which would become the town of Nome. Wyatt Earp and Josephine had first traveled to Alaska in 1897, and had lived in Rampart and St. Michael. In 1899, letters from their friend Tex Rickard persuaded Wyatt and Josephine to travel to Nome and profit from this new gold rush. At Nome, Wyatt partnered with Charlie Hoxie to build the Dexter Saloon, the first 2-story wooden building in Nome, and also pursued some mining claims in the area. By all accounts, the Dexter Saloon had been profitable, and 1901 would be the last year the Earps would be in Alaska. Wyatt would sell his partnership in the saloon and his claims and go back to California. There is a family legend that Wyatt and Josephine left with $80,000. While in Los Angeles in December of 1901, a reporter interviewed Wyatt and had this to say: Wyatt Earp, the well-known sporting authority, passed the day in Los Angeles with his wife. He has just returned from Nome, where he has mining properties sufficient to make him financially comfortable for the remainder of his life. All this is to say that in 1901, Wyatt Earp had experience running a successful saloon in a gold mining town and had money to invest in a new endeavor. In 1899, gold and silver was discovered in Esmeralda County, Nevada. The camp that formed became known as the Southern Klondike, in reference to the Klondike Gold Rush in Canada. In May of 1900, Jim Butler was on his way to this Nevada Klondike when he decided to make camp at a spring known locally as Tonopah. Here, Butler discovered a rock outcropping, which he believed was rich in silver. Butler took samples and brought them to an assayer in Klondike, who proceeded to tell him that it was merely iron. Undeterred, Butler went back to the Tonopah Spring and collected more samples. A friend of Butler's paid an assayer in Austin, Nevada to look at the new samples, which proved to be rich in both silver and gold. As with any gold or silver discoveries, a nearby camp was set up, at first named Butler, but people still referred to it as Tonopah, and eventually the post office renamed it Tonopah in 1905. In 1901, news of this new rich mining camp flooded California. California newspapers ran headlines like, "At Tonopah in the desert, piling up tons of very rich ore," and "Tonopah claims yield fortunes. Carson Jeweler cleans up $86,000 from leased land." The Los Angeles Evening Express, the same paper that would interview Wyatt in December, ran this headline just a couple of weeks earlier in November. "Nevada's new El Dorado, Tonopah, once a trackless desert, now is a thriving town inhabited by mineral seekers." Wyatt Earp had gotten in early enough at Nome during its gold boom to make good money, and now a mining camp much closer to California was beginning to take off. It's no surprise that Wyatt and Josephine decided to try their luck in Nevada. Thankfully, a newspaper in Tonopah, the Tonopah Bonanza, was started in 1901, and from it we can learn about Wyatt and Josephine's stay in the town. On February 1st, 1902, the Tonopah Bonanza published, Wyatt Earp and wife and H. Martin arrived from Los Angeles Tuesday. Mr. Earp has just returned from Nome and comes to Tonopah to engage in the saloon business. He has a big wagon loaded down with soft hardware, and as soon as he and his partner, Mr. Martin, secure a location, they will be home to all. They are good citizens, and we welcome them to Tonopah. News that Wyatt Earp was opening a saloon in Tonopah began to be spread throughout Nevada. The paper at Winnemucca said, Wyatt Earp, the notorious sporting man of Arizona, California, and Nome, has opened a saloon in Tonopah. The paper at Yerington said, Wyatt Earp, the notorious gunman, has located in Tonopah. And there were also mentions of Wyatt moving to Tonopah in the newspapers for Elko, Reno, Eureka, and Hawthorne, Nevada. Getting back to the Tonopah Bonanza newspaper, on February the 8th, Wyatt Earp opened up his saloon. Wyatt Earp will open his saloon to the public tonight. It is called the Northerner and is 2 doors below Miners Exchange Hall. He invites all to call. It seemed Wyatt wanted to diversify his investments in the new town. On February 15th, the paper said, Wyatt Earp will shortly put on a stage line between Ray and Tonopah. Wyatt had been interested in starting a stage line for quite some time. When he first moved to Tombstone in 1879, Wyatt had brought a wagon with him that he planned on turning into a stagecoach. But there were already 2 stagecoach companies running, and so he abandoned that plan. Now in 1902, Wyatt was reviving the idea. The town of Ray was in the same county that Tonopah was in, Nye County. Ray was another mining town and existed between 1901 and 1904. However, it didn't pan out like other areas and became a ghost town. I don't believe Wyatt's plan was carried out, as I can't find any other reference to him starting a stage line between the 2 towns. In February, a Frank Butler was already running a daily stage from Tonopah to Ray. In June, a new stage line to Ray was advertised. Ho for Ray, new stage line, Humphrey and Rice. Have comfortable coaches and fast stock on the Ray and Tonopah stage line. The stage leaves Lothrop and Davis's store every morning at 8 o'clock for Ray, the new El Dorado. Carrying passengers and freight, single fare $2.50, round trip $4. Leave orders at post office store. Even if his plans for a stage line fell through, Wyatt still had his Northern Saloon, which was in a good location, being near the Miners Exchange Hall on Lower Main Street. On February 22nd, a placeholder for an ad was published in the Tonopah Bonanza newspaper. This space reserved for Wyatt Earp and Al Martin, proprietors of the Northerner, now open. See ad next week. The ad for his saloon lets us know a little bit about what kind of establishment Wyatt was running, and that the name changed a little bit. The Northern, Wyatt Earp, proprietor, a gentleman's resort. Lower Main Street, Tonopah. Only the choicest wines, liquors, and cigars are passed over the bar. Courteous mixologists and kind treatment to all patrons. When thirsty, sample the good goods at the Northern. Wyatt would run this ad in the Tonopah Bonanza the entire time it operated in the town. Besides the saloon business, Wyatt served as a deputy U.S. Marshal in Tonopah, working with U.S. Marshal J.F. Emmett. He did not see any action in this role, and his time was usually spent in serving papers to defendants in federal court cases. Wyatt was given a more exciting job by mining engineer John Hayes Hammond as the leader of a private security group to kick out claim jumpers. Wyatt also hauled ore and supplies for the Tonopah Mining Company. Although Wyatt certainly kept busy in Tonopah, Josephine was a different story. From March through July, the newspaper noted trips that Josephine made back to California. On March 8th, Mrs. Wyatt Earp departed for Oakland Wednesday on a visit to her mother. On April 5th, Mrs. Wyatt Earp returned from Oakland Friday night. And on July 26, Mrs. Wyatt Earp returned to Tonopah Monday after an absence of 2 months in Oakland. Finally, Wyatt Earp and Josephine's stay in Tonopah came to an end in August. On August 15th, the paper in Hawthorne, Nevada published, "Jim Crozier has purchased Wyatt Earp Saloon in Tonopah." It appears that Crozier had been another partner of the saloon and decided to buy out Wyatt's share. On March 22nd, the newspaper had listed Crozier, Martin, and Earp together as having paid a fire tax assessment. The last ad for the Northern Saloon had been published on August the 2nd. Wyatt Earp's Northern Saloon in Tonopah had only existed for a little over 6 months, from February 8th to August 1902. Wyatt and Josephine went back to Los Angeles, but their time in Nevada would not be over. They would return several times to prospect in Esmeralda County. The Northern Saloon would be resurrected a few years later by Wyatt Earp's friend Tex Rickard, only this time it would be in Goldfield, Nevada. The Goldfield newspaper ran this article on January 13th, 1905. The Northern. A new saloon, to be known as The Northern, will be open Saturday night in the building on Main Street adjoining the Frisco Cafe. The proprietors are Tex Rickard, formerly of Nome, and Jim Morrison of Seattle, and both are well known and very popular. The building has been fitted up in the finest style, and the new saloon will be a first-class resort in every respect. In the years that followed, there would be a couple of stories published about Wyatt Earp in Tonopah. In 1903, a story began to be spread about Wyatt Earp with the headline, "Wyatt Earp Met His Match," or "Wyatt Earp Met His Match in the Mining Town of Tonopah." The story was told by Ben Goldsman, described as a Tonopah prospector and mining man. The events described by Goldsman took place a few months ago. The story opens with, "This fellow Earp came into Tonopah some time ago and immediately commenced to get himself unpopular. A great many of the boys knew him by reputation and didn't want to get mixed up in any fracas, as Earp was said to be a gunman." Goldsman goes on to relate that one night Wyatt was very drunk and gambling and eventually lost all the money he had on him. Wyatt goes to Josephine to get more money. Wyatt continued to gamble until Josephine came by and told him to go home. Wyatt then hit her in the face and she fell. A young man named Warren told Wyatt he was a coward, and Wyatt reached for his gun, but Warren knocked him across the room. Friends broke up the fight. Warren and Wyatt both armed themselves and almost get into a gunfight, but friends kept Warren in the hotel he was staying at. The next day, Wyatt tried to shake Warren's hand to show peace, but Warren wouldn't take it. Earp got out of town a few days after. I have a hard time believing this story for a number of reasons. For one, there is no reference to this in the local Tonopah newspaper. There seems to be no reference to Wyatt Earp in the Tonopah Bonanza after he sold his share in the saloon in August of 1902. There is only one source to this story, Ben Goldsman, and he said it happened a few months ago. The story was published in October 1903, so the story would have had to have taken place in 1903. Before this story was making the rounds, a similar story had been published about Wyatt Earp threatening people in Dawson up in Canada and a short Mountie putting Wyatt in his place. But Wyatt Earp responded to this article by stating that he had never even been to Dawson. The Tonopah story even has the same headline, "How Wyatt Earp Met His Match." I believe the Dawson article inspired Goldsman to create the Tonopah story. In 1909, the Tonopah Daily Bonanza newspaper published an article about a newspaperman hired by the Tonopah Mining Company to guard some land that other people had tried to claim. This supposedly happened during the early days of Tonopah. The end of the article mentions Wyatt Earp. One day, Senator Oddie came up to tell the boys that if there should happen to be any signs of hostilities, one of the crowd had better go for Wyatt Earp, who in those days in Tonopah was a deputy marshal here. The newspaper man at once arose and addressing Mr. Oddie said, "In view of the fact that I am the youngest man here, Mr. Oddie, I think I will appoint myself a committee of one to go for Mr. Earp if things begin to look nasty." It was then and there agreed that the newspaper man should go on that errand if it were necessary. When Audie had gone, the young fellow turned to the other members of the crowd and said, "Now you fellows will not be able to call me a coward. When the fighting begins, you stay on the job, while I'll be off running like hell looking for Earp." And that is the story behind this photograph of Wyatt Earp's Northern Saloon and his time in Tonopah, Nevada. Although the saloon was operated by Wyatt for just 6 months, it gives us a glimpse into what kind of life he led after his time in Tombstone.